Solutions.com.
21st Century Radio is sponsored by Hieronimus and Company. Now more of 21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Zohara.
It's all about soul. It's all about faith and a deeper devotion. It's all about soul. 'Cause under love is a stronger emotion.
Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington runs our board. You know, the online news world is powerful, vibrant, and effective. For a number of years, I've been reading a blog called The Daily Kos, that's K-O-S. It is a group blog, an internet forum focused on liberal American politics. They also feature a participatory political encyclopedia, glossaries, and other content, and it is sometimes considered an example of what's called netroots activism as described in Wikipedia. Founded in May 26, 2002, it's in its 16th year. Another independent magazine is called Politizoom, P-O-L-I-T-I Zoom.com, which covers our fast-moving political environment, featuring the news, the latest events, and fantastic commentary. One of the contributors to both is a man named Joseph Murphy, who goes by the moniker of the Murfster35. Murphy says of himself that, quote, he is a lifelong liberal political junkie. Being born and raised in Chicago, he is no stranger to bare-knuckle politics. He spent 20 years working for United Airlines and another 9 as a fraud prevention expert for a large online retailer, unquote. He was once a hockey player, not the Canadian one by the same name, and a stand-up comedian, giving him an edge that most of us commentators lack, and I have to say, he makes me laugh when I want to cry. He is the author of several Kindle books now available online, one called President Evil, The Rise of Trump in the 2016 Primaries, and its sequel, President Evil 2, A Clodwork Orange. Murfster35 is a top recommended writer. He is the father of several daughters and is dedicated to making the world better for them, and I honor this commitment. He is the only person I know who listened to every single one of DT's entire campaign year speeches, just as I am the only newscaster I know who back in the heydays of the early 2000s read the entire NAFTA and GATT. It puts us in the same category as outrageous, intrepid, what are we, diviners. Thank you for joining us, Murphy.
Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
I'm very well. You know, and I read your recent post, and we have so much to talk about, so I thought we should start with why your book came as a result of your 2016 primary vigilance, and why, and the catalog, basically, that you created by listening to this man's speeches every day of the week.
Well, excuse me, once, starting on November the 9th, a little while after November the 9th, when I came out of the bedroom and I could get off of my antidepressant medications, the one thing that I kept hearing, both on the coast and just from all kinds of outlets, was, how in the world did this happen? You know, what happened? And I started thinking that, starting with the day he trundled down that guilt elevator to the wild cheers of a paid audience, I covered the Republican primaries exclusively, writing 1 and sometimes even 2 and 3 articles a day, depending on what was happening. And sitting in my library of articles was basically a complete roadmap of how we got to where we are. We're taken one at a time. They were just an individual snapshot of that particular moment, but if you put them all together in chronological order, you can get a kind of a sense and a flow of the road that we took from June of 2015 to November 8th of 2016.
Maybe we can talk about some of those particulars, because it is true. You are the only person I know who had the stamina and, I guess, the stomach I mean, I joke to people that if I were still in this business, I would have had a cardiac arrest about 7 months ago or 8. And so I can't really do what you do. And so I really appreciate you and others who stay the course in the media and are trying to do a yeoman's job, if you will, for the nation. So what did you notice in listening to every speech Trump ever gave in 2016 about his speech pattern and about the way in which he uses communication?
Well, I mean, it was identical, or not identical, but it was crystal clear early on that he's a very unpolished speaker. And it was also extremely clear that he was dialed into a very specific group of people that we now call the Trump base. And from the day he rode down the elevator and started ranting and raving against Mexicans being rapists and carrying drugs and this and that, it was obvious that everything that he did was geared towards that one base. And I realized as time went on, I think it was sometime, if I remember correctly, I think sometime in October when I wrote a diary before the first primary had even been voted on, that the candidacy for the GOP was Trump's to lose. And the reason why I felt that way was I just looked at simple math. Whenever you looked at polls, Trump was logging in a solid 25 to 35% in every single state, and that was that very fundamental populist Trump base that he was speaking to, and all the other 15 people in the field were in single digits. And if he just simply continued to roll into the primaries, all these winner-take-all primaries with that 25 to 35% base, by the time enough of the remaining 15 people called out of the herd to only leave one or two challengers, he would have such a huge delegate lead that it was going to be almost impossible for anybody else to be able to catch him, and that ended up being exactly what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look at the themes that he used consistently, as you point out, to that base who, you know, there's a level of racism and misogyny and sexism and just the most hideous part, basically, of human behavior, of any human anywhere at any time. How has that behavior changed, or has it just become more magnified?
I don't know that it's really changed, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know that it's really become any more magnified. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, in the very early stages, like his speech when he in Trump Tower when he announced his candidacy, for quite a while there, the mainstream media, everybody but Fox, looked at him as really cool time filler because they didn't even have to pay anchors to sit there while he gabbled, and nobody took him seriously because somebody spouting that kind of racist populist claptrap couldn't possibly win. And then as he started mowing down opponents, people started paying more attention. What I think has happened is Trump is totally transactional, and he feeds off of the adoration of his base. So now that he's actually the president and he honestly feels that nobody can touch him, what he's starting to do is he's starting to accelerate the pace of his commentary in order to keep that base rolling along with him.
And one of the things I observed early on, and I had to just stop listening because I used to do this as a full-time living, and, you know, I did it for the first Bush administration, then all of the Clinton administration, then part of the second Bush administration. And literally after 10 years, day in, day out, I had to stop because it was just destroying me, my health, my sanity. And there was nothing else to learn about oligarchy and how it destroys a constitutional republic. But now we're actually in the field of a destruction of a constitutional republic. The news cycle is what I kept saying to my husband. Why does the media let this guy control the news cycle? Why do they treat his slander, libel, his Twitterous, just horrid behavior as news? It's not news, it's bullying. Why don't they just turn it on its head and cover the real stories behind the story and stop covering the cult of the personality? And then I learned, oh no, we live in the cult of the personality. But this has shifted since his performance in Russia. In what way do you think?
Well, to be honest with you, Doctor, I think it's actually changed over time. Mm-hmm. When he first started out campaigning, like I said, the media covered him simply because of the fact that he was explosive and basically nonsensical in most cases and so inflammatory that it gave them automatic subject matter, and they pampered him. And once he actually became the presidential nominee, they started covering him more seriously. And they actually started spending more time on the content and not so much on the tweets and the chatter. Over the last several months especially, several commentators on both CNN and MSNBC, including Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell, along with Chris Cuomo, they will not play or display his purely derogatory, inflammatory tweets.
Good.
They don't consider that news. They consider that just Trump trying to stoke his base, and they're not going to give him that kind of oxygen. The big problem for the media is that now that he's the president, Dr. Zoe, he is the story. And he makes damn sure he continues to be the story every day. Back in the primaries, he would get up and poop tweet at 3 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., he was on the horn to one of the morning talk shows on TV by phone, and with a matter of a few words, he controlled the cycle for the entire day because the media let him.
Yeah.
Now that he's the president, he makes sure that he finds one thing a day that's topical that he can be obnoxious about, and now the media has no choice but to cover him because he is the president, and what he's talking about could actually affect policy and human lives.
Well, that's a generous perspective, not one I always understand, and I certainly don't have sympathy for it because I was an investigative broadcaster, and what I learned is follow the money. That's the story. So let's talk about the Cohen tapes because, you know, between Rudy Giuliani and Trump himself, you would think that the two of them would know better than to put the evidence out front for the world to see. I mean, what has happened?
I'll tell you, Doctor. So when it comes to the Trumpster and Rudy Giuliani, I long ago gave up on them having enough common sense to come in out of the rain. And a lot of it boils down to the fact that what you have to remember is that Trump honestly doesn't care. He's the president.
No, he's the monarch. Wait a second. And the Congress has given him an executive dictatorship pass. We can talk about executive orders another day, which is, it was only meant, folks. Wait, I need to say this. I got to get this off my heart. Executive orders were originally designed to be used by the President of the United States should the Congress be in recess and we were under threat of attack. That was its sole purpose, was to defend the nation against foreign enemies. What has it become? An executive dictatorship with a pass on the legislative branch, which is who represents the citizens of the states. We are not friggin' federal citizens. Get a grip. State senators and attorney generals and local sheriffs. Stop the madness. All right, I feel a lot better. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad, and I don't disagree with anything you said. But hopefully this will make you even a little bit better, make you feel even a little bit better. Because of the fact that Trump is so abysmally ignorant of both history and the Constitution, out of all of the executive orders he signed, the vast majority of them tend to be advisory orders. He's just announcing he's going to do something.
Right.
Whoop-de-doo. I can go on Twitter and announce that I'm going to the bathroom, and it doesn't really have any effect on the world. But the executive orders that he actually tries to execute, the administration is so clumsy and incompetent that almost none of those executive orders get to go into effect. He had to try 3 times to get the bloody Muslim travel ban in place, and by that time it ceased to be of any useful import. He tried to ban same-sex and transgender people from joining the military, and before the court could even rule that it was unconstitutional, the military said, "You're out of your gourd. Go sit down in the corner." Most of the really important actionable executive orders that he signs end up getting clogged up in court because activists know what he's going to do. They know he can't get it through Congress, so they just wait for him to sign the order, and within 24 hours, the ACLU or the Sierra Club or whoever's affected is in court putting a stop to it. The same thing with Sessions trying to stop federal funds for sanctuary cities. Boom, that went right to federal court, and it was deemed to be unconstitutional. So it could be a lot worse if they actually had a capable administration that was able to word these things properly.
You know, that does give me hope. Thank you. That's what I said to somebody about your writing. I mean, there was this one thing you said, "Excuse me while I go to my darkened room and yell in my pillow." It's like, often.
Yeah, I think that was yesterday.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I think that was talking about Rudy Giuliani and how he really romanced the terrier when he went on Fox to say why Michael Cohen was such a vicious liar. But you had asked about this Cohen thing, and Trump feels he's invincible. And again, Trump thinks of nothing but that 32 to 36% base. That is his oxygen. And that's why I thought Bill Maher nailed it on the nose in his comedy special on HBO, and every time Trump sees news he doesn't like, one of his staffers turns around and goes, "Quick, get me 9,000 drooling morons in an airplane hangar in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, stat." I mean, these congratulate me tours are what he lives on. And I have no doubt that in order to impress his base, he will go ahead and shut down the government on September the 30th if they don't give him money for his wall, and if they don't end the visa lottery, and if they don't turn immigration into a merit-based system. He could care less if it kills his own party in the elections. He doesn't look at that as his party. His party is the Trump party, and that's the 32 to 36% that he'll please by shutting down the government to try and force the Dems to give in on his wall. So he really couldn't care less about Michael Cohen. As long as his 32 to 36% buy whatever is jammed down their throats by the Fox News bubble sphere, he's got no problems. He doesn't think Mueller can touch him.
And it is so interesting because this $12 billion, let's tax 12 generations down line to pay for my personal predilections of, trade war, and let's destroy the farming in the Americas. It's so insane as to be unbelievable. And so the good news is that farmers, which were part of this 37%, aren't standing idling by. They don't want to be serfs. They don't want to be, handed out money. They want to have a living wage and to preserve this beautiful tradition of farming in our nation. We're going to take a brief break. Our guest is Joseph Murphy. You probably know him online as Murfster35. You can follow his writings at Politizoom, POLITIZoom.com, or at Daily Kos, www.dailykos.com.
I'm John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn. grassroots organization of mental health professionals who believe that Donald Trump is mentally unfit and should be removed under the 25th Amendment. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Zohara.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Indeed, Dr. John Gardner, Dr. Brenda Lee, and others who have joined us or have co-authored their work and have been covered on this program. It's extremely important, and it has been to me from all along. I told people in the very beginning, because I never followed Trump when he was a star in New York or whatever it was he was doing. I just never was interested. But once I did, I said, oh, he's a classic malignant narcissist. And malignant narcissists are as predictable as a tornado spewing off debris when it turns. And it's interesting. Our guest, Joseph Murphy, who is called Murfster35 is his handle. He's a commentator on Politizoom.com and the Daily Kos, KOS.com, both online phenomenal news forums if you want to get a perspective perhaps you don't see elsewhere, always up to date, is this notion of being mentally unfit. Talk to us a bit about that from your own perspective. Are you there, Murph? Yeah, there you are.
I'm right here. Obviously not being a health care professional anymore, and certainly not a mental health professional. I'll leave that to the things. Anything in excess can be detrimental. I mean, even fitness can be detrimental if you carry it to an extreme. And he does carry his narcissism to an extreme, added by the fact that I think that at least half of the time I'm willing to go along with other people who believe that he really does live in an alternate reality. He is so used to crafting the world to exactly what he wants it to be as the ultimate 5-time bankrupted business mogul that he's never stopped living in his own world.
Mm-hmm. And
you had mentioned...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and has learned to use, as in the $1 billion bailout of the farm community, by trashing our trade agreements with other nations. It's the same way he declared bankruptcy of his own companies so that other bank holders, the regular deposits, paid his debts. You know, it used to be when you declare bankruptcy, you were actually obligated to those you were indebted to, and they changed those laws to make corporations much easier to be bailed out and to start again. And it's just had a hideous monopoly effect on our whole nation.
Well, you can go even farther back than the Farm Aid practice. Look at his vaunted tax plan. Who do you ultimately think is going to be paying for the $875 billion or whatever that he gave to the corporations in the top 1%, while everybody else gets what's left over? That's all going to go on the checkbook. And he's just ducky with that, and so are the Republicans, because they're finally paying off the overlords who backed their campaigns all these years. But the one thing that I do want to point out is if you've been paddling for as long as I have in the Trump swamp, you can see that there's a very slight gradual sea change going on here. When he first got elected, no matter how erratic he was, nobody said boo. They may have very privately tried to get feelers up to him that maybe this wasn't such a hot-so idea, but absolutely nothing public. But with the child separation monstrosity, not only are Republicans not agreeing with that program, but they're actually pushing back publicly. They're not even bothering to go through underground channels. The same thing with this Farm Aid bill. They're not trashing them, but senators like Grassley and Ernst out of Iowa backing the president, but at the same time saying that they don't particularly agree with this one. And once you start growing enough hair to push back on some things, it gets a little bit easier to grow that hair just a little bit longer and start to find other things to push back on, especially when your seat in November may be riding on just how tightly you attach your your horse to this wagon.
Mm-hmm. But this Helsinki debacle and performance, I don't think any of us in our lifetimes have ever seen a president denounce its own nation and its own intelligence in preference to his handler. It's a peculiar thing, and I do want to share this because we always have new listeners. As I mentioned, I didn't know Donald Trump, and I never watched his shows, and I didn't pay attention to him at all. It wasn't part of my cultural perspective or involvement. But I had a waking vision. I'm a visionary, and I do past life readings, and not on purpose. They just happen. And I saw him as Alexei Romanov in his last life. And I said this very early on after he got elected, and I said, you are watching a monarch wannabe. And that when you follow incarnational patterns, particularly if your lifetime prior ended violently, you often come back to finish what was not finished. He would have been the emperor of Russia. And I really believe this. And so I wonder, who is the Rasputin of this lifetime?
Wow. Well, first of all, you're not the only one that looks at it that way. For several months now, all the way back since shortly after Trump installed his family as 24-hour emotional support, Chris Matthews Hardball has been calling them the Romanov. He's literally been calling the Romanov family on the air and comparing them very, very closely to the Romanovs in pre-revolution Russia.
Oh, and Vladimir Putin would have been the one to have executed him with the KGB. It's so interesting. The dynamic is the same. And if he doesn't watch his step, Putin will exterminate him on the world stage.
And, when you ask who's the Grigory Rasputin for this particular version of the Romanovs, about 6 to 8 months ago, before Fire and Fury came out, I probably would have said that Steve Bannon would likely have been that Rasputin-esque character that just kind of seduces and leads the family, the weak-minded family away. But now that Bannon's gone, if I had to pick one character that I would cast as Grigory Rasputin, it would be Stephen Miller, because he is the author of so many of these racist policies that are dragging the administration into one never-ending quagmire after another and making them look more and more despotic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was interested that the GOP rep Will Hurd wrote this extraordinary New York Times op-ed saying that Trump had been openly, quote, manipulated by Putin on the world stage, embarrassing not only himself, but the U.S. as a country, its intelligence services. And as you point out, this isn't a guy ensconced in some ruby red district. He's like fighting for his career. Talk to us a bit about this upcoming midterm election and what you see happening both with Democrats and Republicans.
Donald Trump. That's the long and short of it right there. And the reason why it's Donald Trump is because of the fact that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And when a serial sexual abuser becomes the president, women get a bee in their bonnet. And it started the day after his inauguration with the history's largest mass protest. And women have not sat down and taken a back seat. They have not gone back to their daily lives. And suburban white women are what the swing district Republicans live and die on. And if those suburban white women bail on the Republican Party, you're toast. You saw it in Alabama when Roy Moore got his head handed to him. It was the white suburban women in the major cities in Alabama that normally keep those swing district Republicans in office that either turned around and voted for Jones out of revulsion or just sat home and didn't vote at all. And you saw the same thing replicated again in Pennsylvania 18 when Connor Lamb won. You've seen variations of it in all of those special elections in 2017 to fill the spots vacated when Trump filled his cabinet. The Democrats averaged a plus 20 in their showing against every single one of those races. and stick a pin, as Rachel Maddow would say in Will Hurd's op-ed, because you hit it right on the nail. That was a blistering rebuke of Donald Trump by a member of his own party, and Will Hurd is not in a safe red district where he can afford to irritate the president like that. He's in a swing district. And if he's able to hold on in Texas and win in November, that's a watershed moment, because that makes it abundantly clear to every other Republican that's going to be running in a tight swing district in 2020 that it's okay to turn on Glorious Bleeder. You'll still be able, your base will come out for you, even if his won't, and it'll be enough to carry you through. So definitely watch what happens to Will Hurd in November.
If you're just joining us, I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. Joseph Murphy, whose handle is, Murfster35, is a commentator on Politizoom and the Daily Cost. He is the author of books, Kindle books, President Evil, A Common Man Looks at Trump and the 2016 GOP Primaries, and the sequel, President Evil 2, A Clodwork Orange, A Common Man Looks at Trump and the 2016 Primaries. Both are available on Amazon.com or from links on 21stcenturyradio.com. Follow Murph's writings at Politizoom, Politi Zoom.com, and the Daily Cost, dailykos.com.
Hello, this is Pete Lyden, the founder of reInvent. You can find us at reinvent.net. We're a group that pulls together top innovators across America, even across the world, to really work on solving complex challenges and actually reinventing our world. And today you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Joseph Murphy, better known as Murfster35. He's a commentator on Politizoom. That's Politizoom.com, Politi Zoom.com, as well as with the Daily Cost. And I really hope you all will just go read these. It's an extraordinary effort by so many wonderful men and women across the nation who do their best to analyze the news in a way that it makes it more digestible and understandable. www.dailycost.com. So, Murph, I want to come back to a few things that I know you've kept up with, and I admit I no longer keep up with this stuff. I'm in a different phase of life, as we say. I now communicate with the animals and the trees, and I had to move on to lighter, brighter work because truthfully, after 25 years of it, I couldn't do it anymore. So I am grateful to you and all of your comrades at Politizoom and Daily Cost and Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, etc. A lot of people have resigned from this administration. Talk to us about that.
Well, they basically fall into a couple of buckets. You have to remember that when Trump never actually thought he was going to win and this was all just a branding exercise, he put Governor Chris Christie in charge of the transition team. And Christie, being a former U.S. attorney and a sitting governor, went very professionally about looking for people and vetting them. And then when he fell out of favor, they pulled Mike Pence in, and he was too busy trying to figure out when Trump would implode so that Karen could start measuring the drapes in the Oval Office. And as a result, first of all, they didn't staff. Over something like almost half of the total staff offices in the West Wing were empty and have remained empty. People that used to pull into the parking garage and have to scramble for a spot, get their pick. And the ones that they did choose, the vetting process was almost non-existent. The vetting process basically boiled down to one thing. Have you ever said a bad word about Herr Fuhrer? If you have, there's a door. If you've never been anything but fawning, whether you're qualified or not doesn't matter. You've got a job. So incompetence tends to breed scandal. And a lot of these low and mid-level staff members either were scandal-ridden or because Trump loves to have dissension in any office place that he works in, the turf wars would get so violent that eventually somebody had to go to keep it from turning into a bloodbath, and somebody was let go. The major ones, those are basically scandal-driven. The only one that you can really say was resigned as a conscientious objector was his economic chief, Gary Cohen, who resigned in protest over his plan on putting a tariff war in place. And unfortunately, I really can't give Gary Cohen any credit either, because if Gary Cohen was going to pick a hill to die on, as a Jewish American, I really would have expected that he would have resigned in protest after having to stand there behind Trump when he made those despicable comments after Charlottesville about goose-stepping Nazis being really fine people. If he could stomach that, I think he blew his chance to go out in a blaze of glory, and he went out with a whimper like a whipped dog instead.
Well, and I remember that his whole, his brotherhood from Yale, was it, who wrote an open letter in the Times to him, urging him to resign. I mean, people that knew him in the Jewish and non-Jewish community, those in the economic communities, all said the same thing, man. Don't fall on the sword over foolishness. You know, and there's an interesting thing about money that I used to always bring up and people always forget, which is that we're one of the larger debtor nations on planet Earth. And, our treasury bonds, which are sold all over the world, China has a great deal of them, over $1.4 trillion, and Germany, a whole bunch themselves. You know, I always joke China has more than Smithfield Ham and land in Kansas. I think Dorothy reads Chinese now. But if they call in their notes, which they can crash this nation. And I find it fascinating how quiet China is, given that this is their century. I predicted it 25 years ago. It was so apparent. But this administration has handed the world over to China. What do you see along those lines?
Well, there's two things to remember, Dr. Zoe. First of all, China and most of the Oriental hemisphere down there, they think in the long term.
Yeah, you're right.
They're thinking 10, 15, 20 years out again. I mean, I love kimchi. I make my own kimchi, and that takes 4 days just to ferment, for crying out loud, and it's nothing but chopped cabbage. So they look a long way out.
You're right.
And they can see past. They know that at the very, very most, there's only 6 more years of this buffoon that they have to suffer through trying to react to everything he does, and then hopefully stability will return.
Oh, man.
And they can go back to business as usual. But the other reason to think of why China is so quiet is you just nailed it right on the head. China has a vested interest in the United States remaining stable and soluble because they own $1.4 trillion in our debt.
Yeah.
If they generate this trade war, or if they go to call in our bonds, our debt notices, and we default, well, who's the one that is most going to be hurt in the calamitous crash because they own the largest amount of that debt on the planet? China will. So they don't want to do anything that's going to upset our apple cart, or they're going to lose 90 cents on the dollar on every one of those notes.
Well, that's the good news. You know, this is what I love about you. All the things I worry about, you take my worries away by showing me, well, look, Zohara, there is another way to look at this. You know, okay, China owns land in Kansas, and they own Smithfield Ham, and they're buying up land all over the world because their own farmland is so toxic and putrid that they don't have enough land to grow food for their people. But I have to say one thing about China. From a Kabbalistic perspective, they are on what's called a chesed meridian. That's a loving kindness meridian. And they really do, in their philosophy, outside their politics, have an exquisite appreciation for the oneness of reality. And we hope that, you know, that their beautiful spiritual teachings are what run the show. But I do want to say something peculiar. I once predicted that we would see China enter our land through our southern flank. And this is going back almost 25 years. And people said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, I see in the future that China will basically come to the rescue of Mexico. And the United States will be so unkind and unfriendly by then to Mexico, which at the time people said, what are you talking about, Zoe? You know, I'm a visionary, so I see things and even I don't know what they mean. And I have a big mouth, so I used to just say them. And now I see it happening, and I'm going like, oh, friggin' A, maybe I shouldn't learn Spanish, maybe I should learn Chinese.
Well, one thing, and maybe this will make you feel a little bit better, too, when you worry about China buying up large swaths of America, cast your mind back, I think it was about 20 years ago in the mid to late 1990s, everybody was in a panic because the Japanese, flush with cash from their automation, was going on a buying spree. There was worries that they were going to own the state of Hawaii. They were buying every hotel and condo complex they could find. They were buying a property in California. They were buying up as much land as they could possibly buy because they had the money to be able to do it, and they looked at the United States as a sound investment. But then what happened? The Japanese yen took a nosedive to the bottom of the swimming pool, and all of a sudden the Japanese were selling off all of that property that they had paid premium dollar for at fire sale prices just to get something out of it so that they could prop their yen up. We could be watching the same thing happening with China if they continue to overextend on U.S. land purchases and U.S. corporate purchases. If something goes wrong and their economy starts to slow down, they can only manipulate their currency so much before it becomes worthless. And if their economy starts to slow down and they start to pile up debt, they, too, could end up having to pull back from all these long positions they took when they started buying all of this property and companies in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. I just remember the panic I had when there was discussion about, leasing our roadways and our bridges and even the Panama Canal to China. And I can remember Clinton was in office then, and I just kept screaming, traitor, traitor. People thought I was a little radical. I am a registered libertarian with no one to vote for. But nonetheless, it's like, folks, we are a constitutional republic, and the federal government is here to represent and serve the citizens of the states. The citizens of the states are not here to serve the federal government. And since that got turned on its head through an illegal income tax, which is basically a wage tax, with corporations not paying, and they are the ones to pay, or foreigners doing business in the United States, or American companies doing business outside the United States, that's who is supposed to carry the taxation needs of our country, and our states still have the prerogative to design their own method for raising their fair share of what was once an apportioned federal government. And when I think how far, Murphy, we have come from the very foundation and practical design of a constitutional republic, it literally makes me weep. There are days I weep over all of this. I wish I could just that's why I like you. You make me laugh. And
well, you have stout feelings, because the one thing that gives me the most hope throughout all of this, other than the fact that with the incredible amount of enthusiasm and grassroots activism that Trump has ignited in the Democratic base like a wildfire, the one thing that gives me the most confidence is that the system is still working as it was intended to.
Yeah, our court system.
The president is a total nebbish who's more involved in looking at himself in a guilt mirror than he is in solving problems. The Congress, Republicans are not going to. They're going to ride this. They're going to ride this roller coaster until the car flies off the rails. But the courts, the courts are holding the main, and that alone is a source of inspiration. But what's even more inspiring is the fact that when you look at these decisions that are coming down, the majority of these decisions putting the brakes on Trump and his grand designs for national martyrdom are Republican judges. They're judges that were put in by Bush Light. They're judges that were put in by Pappy Bush. Some of them are even judges that were put in under Reagan. So if Trump thinks that just the fact that it was a Republican president that appointed a judge means that he's going to get a free pass, he's learning a very bitter lesson in the courts these days.
Yeah, and I have to thank our wonderful Attorney General of the state of Maryland, Brian Frosch, and D.C., and their ongoing suit against Trump for violation of the Emollients Clause. And that's why I said in my little rant, I haven't ranted in so many decades. That felt so good. I used to do that daily.
Oh, yeah. I know why I do it once or twice a day on print.
I feel so much better.
I leave the laptop whistling a happy tune. Oh, man, I just won the lottery.
Exactly. But I'm just so grateful to our Attorney General in the state of Maryland for understanding the power of the states to stop federal actions that are unconstitutional, even when the federal Congress fails in its obligations. And I agree with you, and I thank you. Look, we've got about 45 seconds left, and I'd like to give it to you. What would you like to say to the listeners?
I would just like to say that, like a bad kidney stone, this too shall pass.
Okay.
Nothing is permanent in this life. We've gone through tumultuous times before. I agree with the historian John Meacham that every time we're stuck in the middle of that tunnel, there just always seems to be one white dove of optimism that comes along to light the way. We'll come through this in the long run.
Amen. Thank you so much for your wonderful work. Follow Murph's writings at Politizoom, POLITIZoom.com, or Daily Kos, DAILYKOS.com.
Happy ever after, I hope we can all live more fearlessly, and we can lose all the...
Stay connected with stimulating talk and breaking news on Talk Radio 680 WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.